Morning, everybody. I'm really pleased to have been asked to chair this webinar today. My name's Rosie Dawson. I'm a freelance religion journalist, and I'm one of those people who grew up being dragged around churches and was very resentful about it. And now I go into them on every holiday that I go into. We used to holiday in Norfolk, and I remember being struck even then by the number of churches that were falling into disrepair. And it was the first context in which I ever heard the word redundant. So this is a subject that's very close to my heart. And as I say, I'm delighted to be with you. Anyway, today we've got good news stories. 9 churches are to be removed from the Heritage at Risk register. £3.6 million financial support from the government provided by Historic England, and 32 grade 1, 2 and 2 star listed churches and meeting houses in England have been helped to stay open. And these are some of the fruits of the investment in the National Churches Trust grant programme by the Department for Culture, Media and Sports Heritage Stimulus Fund in 2021 to 22. This webinar is an opportunity to find out more about this work and to showcase 3 of the projects and discuss the future of churches and how they might continue to be supported and kept open. The places of worship helped range from Cornwall to Bedfordshire to Yorkshire, and as well as parish churches, 3 Quaker meeting houses also received funding. I know that in the audience today, we've got representatives from many of the church buildings which have benefited, so a special welcome to you, and a welcome to our other guests who include representatives from the DCMS, Historic England, the Church of England, the Quakers, a number of MPs with cherished churches in their constituencies, and to the Friends of the National Churches Trust who support its work in so many ways. Do please use the chat box to share your comments, and this is also where we'll post any links or other useful information. And if you've got any questions about the buildings that we're featuring, or more generally about this investment project or the future of church buildings, then please put those in the Q&A box. Just to set the scene, joining me are Claire Walker, the CEO of the National Churches Trust, and Diana Evans, Head of Places of Worship for Historic England. Diana, if I can come to you first, could you tell me about, give me the broader context of the Heritage Stimulus Trust, what it was aiming to do, and so on. Could you unmute, please?
Thanks very much indeed, Rosie. It's lovely to be here because celebration is something that the places of worship sector doesn't do enough. And I think this really is something that everybody on this call and others who are associated with the National Churches Trust programme should be cock-a-hoop about. So the important thing, I think, is to put the context of all those achievements of those on this call into the national picture. Now, just to go back a bit, it's quite hard to remember now, but the start of the pandemic took us all shockingly by surprise. And it left many heritage sites, particularly places of worship, in a terrible position. Long planned and urgently needed repairs were unable to start on site. Local donations were, of course, slashed, and national grants all pivoted away from repairs to historic places to supporting pandemic activity, and also supporting the escalating problems of vulnerable people. So that meant that many repairs in heritage buildings had poor prospects of being addressed, with a risk of further delay greatly increasing the costs of eventually repairing them sometime down the road. And that raised as well the spectre of vital heritage construction experts companies going out of business, or equally importantly, losing experienced older workers who would normally have been there to train younger ones to make sure that those skills were handed on. So the government, they realised that they needed to invest in heritage, culture and arts as a way of retaining specialised skills, and also to try and address some of the issues that we've just mentioned. So it set up the Culture Recovery Fund as a sort of umbrella title, which had £1.57 billion in it. And a wide range of bodies delivered that money through various strands, one of which was the Heritage Stimulus Fund, and that's where the Programme of Major Works grants came from.
And I know that the Heritage, that the fund, I mean, it gave a grant to the National Churches Trust, but it also gave grants to other churches and organisations working with places of worship, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think it was very important that the grants structure was delegated. So rather than Historic England dealing with individual applicants, it went through organisations that were trusted and known to be able to deliver funding through their own mechanisms. And the National Churches Trust was one of those, but we also had a whole range of other bodies, not only places of worship.
Thank you. Claire, you're the CEO of the National Churches Trust. So you had quite responsibility in deciding how to allocate the grant that you got through this fund. I mean, what were the criteria that you used in deciding where to put the money?
Well, I mean, we had to have churches that were reasonably ready to go because there was a tight window to get the money out of the door, which was one thing. And because we are established as a grant giver, we've been doing this for 70 years. We have experience and we have churches that apply to us all the time. We were able to find churches that were ready, almost, I don't like to say oven ready, but anyway, but a kind of project that was ready, so that we could then have a sort of long list of churches that would be able to get their project done in the time, had all the permissions, the planning permission, everything that they need in place, and that we had already were able to say, yes, they meet our criteria, because we have, you know, quite stringent criteria anyway ourselves, and that our grants committee would be happy to condone as suitable projects. And then we had that long list and discussions with Historic England as to which churches, you know, it was deemed the best in terms of good outcomes for people, good outcomes for the buildings, and projects that would be able to be completed in the time frame that we were given.
So one of those criteria clearly isn't how many people come through the door, because, you know, as we're going to see in our films, we've got varied projects there. So just tell me a little bit more about how you assess a church. Is it's social action? Is it the beauty of the interior? Just tell me.
That's a combination of things. I mean, the beauty of the interior, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So you can't, you know, for one person, a beautiful church is an ugly church to someone else. So, but we do look at the heritage merits, but we do look at footfall as best we can. We do look at the number of services that are on offer, but we look at the community, the wider community that a church building serves, how many people might benefit, and indeed how many people would benefit further if the church was repaired. Because quite often, if you've got a building, it's fairly obvious really, if you think about it, if a building is not wind and watertight and warm and welcoming for people, then they're not going to come anyway. So by the time you've got your project done and your church is in a really nice you know, nice position and able to welcome people and able to do all the activities that it wants to do, then people start coming in more. That could be for worship, but it could be for other things. It could be to admire, you know, admire the stained glass, admire all the architecture that's there. It might be as a real place of solace and as a place to enable well-being. A lot of people in the country are lonely, and that's not just old people, that could be any age, and having somewhere where you can go in your community that's a safe, trusted, welcoming place with all of the wonderful things that a church building can offer, then, you know, that's a really valuable thing. And so being able to do these projects, it's multifaceted in the outcomes that you can get once your building is well, sustainable really for the future, which is what we're about.
Well, thank you both. We'll come to you at the end of the session in our panel, but let me tell you that the 32 churches and meeting houses were helped by the £3.6 million awarded by the HSF to the National Churches Trust. And to show the range of them, the Trust commissioned 5 films, and we're going to see 3 of them and meet some of the people that were involved. Can I encourage you, as you watch the films, to put any questions you have about them into the Q&A? First, we're going to go to Newport on the Isle of Wight and Newport Minster, which received a grant of over £600,000 for urgent roof repairs. We have with us the Reverend Emma Cooksey and architect John Bailey, who we'll talk to after we've seen this short film.
At Newport Minster on the Isle of Wight, a £2.5 million project is well underway. Its purpose, to ensure a sustainable future for the island's most important church.
This is the civic church for the island. So whenever there's a big thing, Remembrance Sunday, full outside in the square. So you'll be talking 400 people. Anything of significance, locally and nationally, this is the church. This is the prominent church.
If you're a kid that's grown up on the Isle of Wight like me, you know this. You've been there with a school trip or a ceremony or a service or something. It's a part of the sort of identity on the Isle of Wight.
I mean, the National Churches Trust is pivotal to us being able to achieve what we can achieve. You know, they are major funders. In fact, without them, this project would have folded. It would never have started. And so without that money, this building would have a very insecure future.
With funding from the government's Heritage Stimulus Fund, the National Churches Trust awarded Newport Minster a grant of £612,000 for urgent roof repairs and the restoration of the stone facade.
This is the vibrant heart of Newport, and you step into that building and it is a different place. It is a spiritual place. It's a place that, although I appreciate it's been there for about 160 years, it's been a place of prayer for hundreds and hundreds of years. And as soon as you set in the church, not today, you do get a sense of that peace, of that presence, of that spiritual realm.
I've been attending here since 87, so 34 years, but I'm only a novice. We've got people who have been here 70 years. We've got one person who's been here 80 years nearly. And we've got Paul, our oldest member of the congregation. He's been here 90 years this year.
We do need to have a conversation with government about how we are going to care for the tens of thousands of historic churches. When they were originally built, shall we say in the medieval period, it was big landowners, bishops and knights and kings. They paid for them. The ordinary people didn't. The equivalent of those today are Tesco, Sainsbury's, Amazon. They're not going to be giving us money. These are the greatest collection of historic buildings in Europe. English churches are, without doubt. We should be putting significant sums of money into them. Without the Department of Culture, Media and Sport and the money they've been given recently, we'd be in real trouble here. This project would not have happened.
Churches such as Newport Minster make a vital contribution to the civic life and sense of place of local communities. Each year, the National Churches Trust helps keep hundreds of them open and thriving.
That was Newport Minster there, and Emma Cooksey, you're one of the team of vicars at Newport Minster, together with Steve, who we saw in the film. Beautiful church, beautiful tower, on a beautiful island. But the Isle of Wight's got its fair share of social and economic problems. And so how has the work that you've done to the church help with your role in the local community?
Yes, there is quite a lot of deprivation around Newport, like any kind of market town, and obviously it's struggled a lot because of COVID and other factors, and being on an island doesn't always help those kind of factors as well. So we see Newport Minster as really being a part of the community. We want that building to be an open space for everybody, that anybody in need, anybody that needs a place of solace, wants to meet as part of the community, then that is the building where that can happen.
And you got £600,000 from the HSF or through the NCT. It's a £2.5 million project. Where does the rest of the money come from?
We've had lots of different funders, so some of that is from the National Lottery, other funders like Beatrice Lang, and also some local fundraising as well. So lots of different funders have put towards the project that we've got. So we've been very, very lucky. And as John said in the video, without NCT and also some of the other funders that we've had as well, there is no way that this project would have happened at all. I do very much feel that NCT kind of came to our rescue because we did have a private funder, and unfortunately because of COVID they had to pull out. So without NCT stepping up and helping us, it would never have taken off. So
have you tried Amazon and Tesco and Sainsbury's? John, you're the lead architect on the project. So just tell me a little bit about the practical challenges that you face carrying out this work.
They're considerable because St Thomas's Church is in the middle of the square and essentially has no land. So everything we have to do has to be either we have to get permissions or we have to pilot in midair, if you see what I mean. So the project's in 2 phases. The second phase, which is the internal alterations, started on site on Monday, but the repair project you saw, we had to procure the scaffolding separately and have that designed so it stood within the small amount of ground that we own. The contractor then had to have their site and compound partly on the scaffolding, so if you had to climb ladders to get to the toilets or whatever it was, everything else that we had stored up. We had no storage on site, so everything had to come early in the morning, be taken up onto the scaffolding, and it was a real technical challenge to keep our neighbours happy and to get the building delivered on time, bearing in mind the time pressures and the time of year we had to do the work. So yes, a real challenge.
Now you're an architect, so what matters to you, I guess, is the aesthetics and the fabric of the building. But while you're doing this work, are you also thinking about what the building is for?
Yes, I mean, I'm a conservation architect. I look after some fabulous buildings, you know, they're great architectural monuments, but when we come to churches, and it probably is also my personal faith, they are nothing without the people, whether that is for worship or coming for all the other activities. You can have the most beautiful, conserved, repaired and cared for church, but if there's nobody in it, it's a museum. So as from my point of view, my professional point of view, and that goes for the cathedrals and all the other buildings we work with, I like to see a little bit of chaos. I like to see the mess at the back of the church, which shows me it's alive. I will then moan at the church warden that they should be tidying it up, but they won't. And the building has to speak to those who wish to use it and draw as many people in. So that's fundamental. We're here to create a sustainable future for these buildings, one where everybody appreciates them and loves them. So it's a holistic approach to buildings, not just the conservation and repair.
Emma, how do you make sure that the people who come in appreciate the beauty of a new roof? You know, if you've got a reredos that's being restored, then you say, come and look at our new reredos. This is a very practical thing, it had to be done, but you might not go in and sort of see that it's been done in a way. So how do you get people to sort of appreciate that?
I think, well, for a start off, for me, you know, you'd have a big service and then it would start raining and you would literally have to get the buckets out and put them down the aisle to stop the water literally dripping on people. So I think people that regularly may have taken part in some of the larger services would have known how bad the roof was on that building anyway. But it does just look so much smarter from the outside now because we had a lot of the stonework done as well. And we did have 2 of the monuments inside kind of restored as well. So there are some signs inside that the work has been done. We were very lucky that the work was completed just before the Queen's Jubilee. So it meant that we could hold the civic service within the church. And luckily, because the weather wasn't brilliant on that day, and luckily because we'd got our roof, we were fine. So, you know, we could make it almost like a joke of it to people and say, oh, thank goodness we've got our roof now, you know, and things like that. So and I think because the scaffolding was around the building as well, that people knew that there was something going on, and we had a lot of questions about, you know, what work was going on, and so we could talk to people that way.
Thank you both very much. Can I just encourage everyone to use the chat box and the Q&As? I think, does Carl want to alert me to any questions that we've already got about this particular project? If not, I will move on to the next, but just shout if you want to alert me to any questions there.
There's no questions there to bring to your attention.
Right, so next we're going to go to St Mary's Marsh Chapel in Lincolnshire. This is a beautiful church known as the Cathedral of the Marshes. and it received a grant of £36,000 for urgent repairs to gutters, masonry and plaster repairs. We'll have the church wardens Crystal Henderson and Olivia Hurton with us in a moment after this short film.
The Church of England has over 9,000 rural churches, with over 90% of them listed by Historic England for their architectural importance. It's a challenge at the best of times to maintain these historic buildings, but when a congregation is without a vicar, as has been the case at St Mary's Church in Marsh Chapel, Lincolnshire, the responsibility falls entirely upon volunteers.
I'm PCC Secretary, which I've done for perhaps 30, 35, perhaps a little bit more years, and a church warden. And I've been church warden with Crystal, who works her socks off for this church.
I look after it because I just love to do it. Well, we haven't got a vicar at the moment. We've been about, it must be now 5 years.
It's a beautiful church. A lot of the ones around here, that there's so few people attend the churches now that it's getting to be a problem to maintain them.
If we have 12, we're doing very well. And if there's anybody under 70, they're unusual.
I mean, look at it. It's the most wonderful place. People have something consistent in the village who will be there forever.
In 10 years' time, I might be joining the gravestones in the churchyard, and what happens, I don't know. But I don't want St Mary's to fall to pieces under my watch.
The gutters on the north and south aisles have deteriorated over the years, and they've caused damage inside, so there's plaster off in the vestry and the south aisle. So we've got contractors coming in, they're going to replace the gutters, and we're repairing the damage that's caused by it. We're also doing some masonry. The merlons, 1 or 2 of those are loose, so we're bedding a few of those back on, repointing where needed, and some work on the tower.
The people who are involved here at the moment know that they have to lead the way, and like in all that we do in life, we have to lead by example, and I'm humbled by the way in which they do that.
The National Churches Trust have made a huge contribution to our effort and have given us a grant for 36,000, I think it's £168. I couldn't believe it. And it's made such a huge, huge difference.
The only way that there stops being a church here is if people just don't care enough for it to be here. It relies on, as it always has relied upon, the community to support it, to maintain and look after it. That, in a sense, is where its real preciousness comes from, because when you look at the stones and the carved wood and the tiles and the glass, you're not just seeing something beautiful, but you're seeing the beautiful labours and the heart's concerns of generations stretching back hundreds and hundreds of years in this place.
The buildings are an important part of our lives. There's so many people whose life revolves around them, and if they crumble and fall down, I think people's lives crumble and fall down as well.
Churches are a vital and much loved part of national and local history and heritage. Thanks to a grant of £36,000 from the National Churches Trust, funded by the government's Heritage Stimulus Fund, St Mary's in Marsh Chapel will remain open and in use and provide a warm welcome to the local community and visitors.
That's St Mary's Marsh Chapel, and I was very struck by that phrase from the Rural Dean, the beautiful labours and hearts concerns of generations, which are shown in that building. Really lovely. I'm hoping that I have Crystal and Olivia with me. I can see one of you there. Is that Crystal or Olivia I can see there?
Yes. We're both here.
Right, I can only see one of you. So I don't know which one it is, but I'll just start with the question. You've got a beautiful church, you've got a very small congregation. Why is it important that taxpayers' money is spent on this?
You say that?
Well, we use the church for an art exhibition which ran for 4 days, which was hugely well supported, and we have concerts in the church as well as the small congregation who are a joint Methodist and Church of England congregation and are very important.
And there were clearly more than 12 people in that lunch club, weren't there?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, we have at the moment, actually, there are almost 30 now, 29, and we have 4 carryouts as well. And it seems to be growing, and it's lovely to see the people. I'm usually in the kitchen, and it's nice to hear them all laughing and chatting, you know, and it's all part of it.
Now, we saw the Royal Dean there. Have you got a vicar yet?
Have we got
a vicar yet?
No
Any sign that a vicar might be coming? And what difference would it make to have an incumbent there?
Huge difference, wouldn't it?
Yes, indeed.
But we've been without an incumbent for 5 years, 6, 7 years. It makes a lot of difference.
So that the work falls on your shoulders, and as you say, well, you're not getting any younger. I mean, how is the church going to get another generation involved who care about this building as much as you do?
It's very interesting because the National Churches Trust gave us this fund. We have been able to use what resources we had put aside to do this project towards putting in a new bell frame, and the bell ringing has brought in interesting younger people and influential people from the village, and we hope that that will expand our base, and that it's important that the village is interested in the building.
Well, the bell ringing is such a great way of sending out a message that there's a church here, though, isn't there?
Absolutely.
And I'm interested in the appeal of bell ringing because we have bells at our church, and the bell ringers all pack into the belfry, ring the bells, and then church starts, and off they go before
Absolutely, that happens to us as well.
People who might not go to engage in the church in other ways. Thank you ever so much, both of you. We're going to go to the third film now, which takes us to the northwest of England, to Kendal, and to the Friends Meeting House there, which also houses the Quaker Tapestry Museum. The National Churches Trust was able to help 3 meeting houses with heritage stimulus funding. This meeting house received a grant of over £400,000 for urgent repairs to the roof. We'll be talking to Ross Batchelor from the Tapestry Museum and Andrew Smith from the Meeting House after this film.
The Friends Meeting House in Kendal in Cumbria is a historic building dating from 1816. Today it's used both as a Quaker place of worship and the home of the Quaker Tapestry Museum. As with many places of worship, simply looking after the building is expensive. And if repairs are urgently needed, it's hard for the worshipping community to pay for them themselves.
It was built to a very high standard. The quality of materials and the standard of workmanship are absolutely beautiful. But like all buildings, it suffers the effects of the weather, and we have a lot of weather up here. We found a lot of slates were starting to slip. We found the lead work was starting to split as well. And we decided that just doing patch repairs just wasn't good enough anymore. We needed to do something that would put the building back in the condition that it deserved. So we decided to fully reslate over a breathable underfelt, replace all the lead work and do that to a much better standard, do some repointing and repair any rotted timbers.
This is a listed building. It has to be maintained for the good of the public by the owners. And we are just 55 people. As you probably know, a listed building, specialist materials, you need specialist surveyors, you need specialist contractors, and it all costs so much more. And we've got money to a certain extent, but we've just been dealt a whammy with this one, just because of the scale of it and the stuff that's been uncovered.
It's that proverbial can of worms. Once you take the lid off it, you don't know what you're going to find. At some point during the building's history, there was a re-roof carried out and they disturbed all of the eaves details, and they put it back in sort of mid-70s, early 80s standards where conservation wasn't a high issue. It was rather unsympathetic, which caused a lot of structural damage.
We have hit problems with the building. As we opened it up, we found more defects, so more funding needed to be raised.
We have a very interesting old Quaker expression, which is that the way will open. And I've used that many, many times in my life, personally, when I've been in danger of getting upset about something. I've just had to say, calm down, the way will open.
Well, the way has opened, thanks to a grant of over £400,000 from the National Churches Trust, funded by the government's Heritage Stimulus Fund.
The amount of money involved, it would have been impossible to do it without the grant funding as well.
We can keep the doors open and people can still use this building, be that to visit the museum, be that for worship, or we have room hire. It's a building for the community.
We are incredibly grateful to the National Churches Trust for investing in our roof, which will enable us to carry on.
I'm confident that the work that we're doing now will be good for at least another 100 years. And we've been working on that basis. We want to put this building back in the condition that it deserves.
Kendal Friends Meeting House is now able to stay open and at the heart of the community. It's one of 32 places of worship that have benefited from £3.6 million worth of grants awarded by the National Churches Trust, thanks to funding from the Heritage Stimulus Fund, enabling them to save precious heritage and keeping them at the heart of local communities.
That's the Friends Meeting House and Quaker Tapestry Museum in Kendal, which I've had the great pleasure of visiting. And this is a very big project. Andrew, can you tell us what would you have done if you hadn't had this funding?
That's an impossible question to answer because we did have the funding for the original project. But as you heard, when the lid was taken off, it uncovered such a can of worms that, and also the effect of COVID in terms of the substantial increase in material prices, the cost increased to a point where it was unaffordable. And we were faced with a situation where an impossible situation of a building open to the skies in stasis. We would have just stopped work. And that's why I say the answer is impossible.
But there was a way forward. Just tell me what difference it made, you think, to the funding application that the Meeting House houses the Quaker Tapestry, because it's an absolute priceless historical jewel, isn't it? Telling the history of the Quakers through the tapestry.
Certainly is, and I think it's fair to ask Ros to answer this one because she's a trustee of the Quaker Tapestry.
Yes, well, I've just completed service as a trustee of the Quaker Tapestry. I've been one since about 2006 with a little gap in the middle. But yes, the Quaker Tapestry...
Tell us what the tapestry is, because
yes,
that's historical. It isn't actually historical, is it? It tells the history.
It's an embroidery project that was carried out mostly in the late 80s and 90s by about 4,000 or 5,000 people worldwide, to produce a tapestry, an embroidered history of Quaker activity, concerns, the things that are notable in Quaker life in a way. And it, for many years, had no home. And then somebody from Kendal met somebody from the Quaker Tapestry. Kendal was needing to find either a new use for the meeting house, or actually was trying to sell the meeting house. And this was a very fortunate meeting now nearly 30 years ago, which led to Quaker Tapestry exhibition coming to Kendal, and it's been developing ever since as a partnership use of the meeting house. And it's that partnership which is so incredibly valuable. And it's Quaker Tapestry actually in our agreement are responsible for the maintenance of the meeting house, but with a shared funding arrangement with local Quakers. But this project, as Andrew has mentioned, was way beyond our resources, just from ordinary income. And we started fundraising, well, back in 2017-18, I think, and we were gradually raising funds for all the planning part of it, getting the architects involved. And we, in the end, we were getting there, but we were interrupted by COVID, and we had to turn our attention instead to some fundraising to cover the core costs of the staff running the exhibition, so that we could keep them in employment. And we're beginning to pick up now, post-COVID, on visitor numbers. We have a new manager who came into post now nearly 2 years ago, and we have many activities, bringing in local schools, bringing in people for workshops, craft-related workshops, and it really does feel a very vibrant place to be for both members of the local Quaker meeting and ourselves as trustees for Quaker Tapestry.
I'm sure Kendal Tourist Board are extremely grateful that that the tapestry ended up there, because it's kind of put Kendal on the map a bit more, hasn't it? I think having the tapestry there. Andrew, is this an approach that other Quaker buildings might need to learn from? I mean, if you had been just the meeting house and hadn't had the additional of this wonderful artifact to show, you would have struggled far more. I mean, what's the Quaker approach generally to how their buildings are used in whatever setting they're in?
It's a major issue at the moment, as with churches, with reducing membership. And a lot of the properties are elderly, as with churches. And it's almost an unresolvable question.
Yeah. Okay. Now, the use of volunteers, Ros. I mean, I'm presuming that you have a lot of volunteers at the Tapestry Museum. I mean, how easy is it to get volunteers to engage in loving a building, loving a project?
I think many of our volunteers are actually local Quakers at the moment. We used to have more people who would come perhaps for a week at a time, but it actually put a bit of a strain on staff resources, retraining and training volunteers. So the fact that local Quakers are involved, helping with some of the education projects, helping in the exhibition, all of that is just fantastic. And I feel people are lit up by the experience in a way. I mean, perhaps I shouldn't be saying that. I used to be a Kendal Quaker. I actually grew up in Kendal. I was born in Kendal, and I was married in the meeting house. But those are additional reasons for me wanting to see it carry on as a vibrant hub for all its activities.
On the subject of volunteers, Crystal and Olivia at Marsh Chapel, I want to go back to you if I might, because I think I rather shortchanged you a bit earlier. But you know, as volunteers, what advice, or how can you encourage other volunteers to sort of come on board and help you share your building with the community?
Well, I find it quite difficult actually, because I mean, at the moment, all our volunteers are elderly, and we find it extremely difficult to get younger people interested in it. I don't know.
I feel though that it's quite a small community, our church worship community, but the hospitality that Crystal manages to provide is amazing and makes everybody very welcome should they pass through the door, and that's most important.
I think the issue with getting volunteers is that you need to find people who love the building as much as you do, don't you? And who care for it as much. Volunteers need to be there to communicate their sort of love and enthusiasm for the place. And that this is really one of the big challenges that churches and meeting houses are going to face in the future, isn't it? With the sort of demographic of worshippers. I mean, Quakers are, I don't know if your demographic matches that of the Church of England, but it's And it's lovely to be encouraged by these stories today, but thinking about 50 years hence.
Yeah.
How does that make you feel? Crystal?
I think if people in 50 years' time feel that it's worthwhile, they will gather and work at it. If it isn't, yes. If it isn't, as I say, we don't want it to fold on our watch.
Right,
I think there's possibly a difference here between Quaker meeting houses and the churches, because a meeting house can be used for anything. There's no problem with having a party in a meeting house, so long as there's no alcohol.
In cathedral naves, I don't think.
Well, if that's the case, and if it's possible to get the community into the building to use it as a community, rather than coming in for a religious service, which they won't come to, then it can spill over, can't it?
We're actually trying very hard to like having concerts, and we have brass bands, and we have singers, and we have the art exhibition, and you know, and people do come to the building and they do say what a wonderful building it is. But trying to get more people involved or get more volunteers, we're all getting older, and we are really actually worried. You know, what the future will bring, but hopefully once we're gone, there are other people who say, look, this is a wonderful building, we want to participate, we want to help, and so on.
I guess Newport Minster, I'm thinking it might be a little bit easier for you, given that you are, you know, you've got no land, you're bang smack in the middle of the town. But just tell us about the challenges that you face in getting volunteers and engagement, or share some tips for how you do it.
I think to be honest, getting volunteers anywhere, especially post-COVID, is difficult. You know, people's priorities have changed, and maybe people don't have as much free time as they used to. So I think it's a problem that everybody shares. We are again working. What we've realised at the Minster is that we can work with other charities around us, and it might be that maybe we can't provide the volunteers, but we can provide a building, you know, and we can provide facilities and things like that. So we're working a lot more with local charities, and you know, a lot of the local charities have got small offices, and they need a big space for some of their events. So we open our doors and say, well, why don't you come and use our church? So it's ways that we can still work with the community, but it doesn't have to be all of our church communities doing absolutely everything, which at the Minster is a problem, because we have so many different events happening all the time, and we were very concerned that our volunteers were just getting overtired and you know, that kind of thing. So that's the way that we've kind of approached it, is approaching different charities and working together a bit more closely.
Thank you very much, all of you. And Carl, I don't know if there are any questions that you want to bring into this part of the session. I'll be moving on to our panel again in just a moment.
There are a couple. The first one really is partly in relation to John, and then the work that he did on Newport. I wondered if he saw himself in that tradition. We're talking about the history of volunteering and the importance of bringing in different communities, but we also saw with the Kendall building how past restoration work hasn't been as effective as it could have been. When you're completing the work that you're doing, I guess you must take a lot of pride in building something and constructing something that's going to last for a substantial period of time, and the knowledge that your work will be looked at by successors in your generation, in your line of work from generations onward.
Yes, I think you're correct. I personally see myself as one of those huge numbers of nameless individuals who all contribute to make sure these buildings remain in good condition and are passed on. You know, there's no great monument to the roofer or the mason or the architect. Our monument is the building that allows the worshipping community and the wider community to continue in that place. And yes, it is very gratifying. And one church in particular I look after, which is Milton Regis in Kent, is the Royal Church for the Kings of Kent, and it was built in 640. Now, the thought that it's been going for 1400 years, and we don't know the names of anybody really who worked on it, and you're just this little cog that will carry on, and we're a relay runner. We pick the baton up and we pass it on to the next people, and our monument is it remains in use, and that's very much how we see our work.
I think that's very good. I think that phrase "open and use" is obviously something that resonates, I think, very strongly with everyone here. I've got one other question to ask as well, which is anybody aware if there'll be any other rounds of funding coming? Maybe that might go to the panel.
I think that might go to the panel. Thank you very much, everybody. The thing I was really struck with one of the films, I forget which one it was where somebody said, if the building crumbles and falls, people crumble and fall. And I think that just reminds us of just how important this work is. And sometimes it can seem to us like it's a little bit of mortar and a bit of, some scaffolding up, and it's so much more than that. So I hope that you've enjoyed seeing these films and learning some of the work that the National Churches Trust is able to happen through the Heritage Support Fund, Stimulus Fund. Just back to Diana, this project has seen £50 million help listed churches in England overall. Now that's a drop in the ocean, isn't it? It sounds a lot of money, but the Church of England's got a repair backlog of about £1 billion. So how do you make the case for yet more funding from a very cash-strapped government?
Well, that's a good question, Rosie, and one that I wrestle with every day, because we are trying to, in partnership with colleagues, including the National Churches Trust across the sector, trying to prepare a bid that's oven ready for when a spending review is announced, so that we can have all our evidence lined up to persuade the Treasury that lots more money would not just be very helpful to the fantastic volunteers and the amount of time and effort they give to projects, as we've heard, and to the craftsmen and the very skilled people and professionals like John and those who've been working on these buildings, but also that it is a sound economic investment in terms of the jobs that it creates, the skills that it generates, the traditional crafts, some of which you only find in Britain, that can be handed on to future generations. And I think what we're trying to do very much is saying, this isn't handing out cash, this isn't just doling out money to be nice to people, to keep nice things looking nice. This is actually also a hard investment in the infrastructure and the future economy of the country. And so I think we're going to have to be a bit more hard-nosed than perhaps we have been in the past. And I feel that this sort of celebration and the films that have been produced and the stories that we're collecting from the programme, not just about places of worship, but about heritage more widely, is a really good way of saying, this is government, what you have achieved by releasing this money, and volunteers have added so much value to the nation. Yeah. And so I think that's the way forward. It's
really interesting because you've just prompted me a memory of going to York Minster and the stonemason's yard and seeing real living people working on stone. And we don't see a lot of that. And I wonder whether organisations like your own and the National Church Trust need to shout more about that. It's jobs, it's work, it's people's wages. They go out and spend in the economy. And I think sometimes we see the restoration, we say that was lovely, and we don't see the ripple effects of that in the economy.
I think that's true, because most people imagine that buildings, such as the ones we've been talking about, are looked after by them. And they don't know who them is, but they assume it's a sort of magical army of people who, somehow have access to unlimited money and unlimited knowledge and unlimited time. And as we all know, that is not true. And places of worship are looked after by the people who worship in them on behalf of the rest of their community who may use them for other things but don't necessarily want to be religious in them, as they say, but they also are of national and international significance to the identity of the country, to landscapes, townscapes. And so I think the more we can get people up on scaffolding tours to see close up what craftspeople are doing, or to visit workshops, I think those things, getting hands-on, getting somebody into the building at ground level, giving a group of school children the chance to put on some goggles and see how much a mallet weighs and tips and stuff. Those kind of things grip the imagination of young people, and I think that's where our future hope for skills lies.
I want to say good luck with the health and safety assessments for that one. School kids with mallets. I think it was John in one of the films said, this is the greatest historical set of buildings in Europe. I mean, Claire, your chairman, Philip Rutnam, has described the maintenance of church buildings as the single biggest heritage challenge facing the UK. How, and 3.6 million is great, but you need an awful lot more. How are you going to persuade people to give it to you?
But we'll continue working, as Diana said, and trying to make a case that's ready for the government so that they can look at it. And we do need a national plan for what we're going to do with these buildings. And Diana's described really well about, it's the DNA of the UK, really, in a way. All these buildings, imagine going on a train journey somewhere and not seeing a spire or a tower out the windows, but you don't think about that because they're just always there. But I think, yeah, definitely a national plan and much more recognition of what these buildings are worth. I mean, we produced the House of Good report, which, if people haven't read it, is available on our website, but it shows and actually this figure is now without inflation added to it. Church buildings and what they offer to their communities provide a value of £55 billion in terms of the economic value to the UK every year. That's a colossal amount of money, and so colossal that you can't get your head around it. But it means for any individual church, a few hundred £1,000 perhaps a year in benefits to local people. But imagine if that's gone. Who's going to take that? Who's going to replace that if the church buildings are not there? And we only looked at a few things that churches offer. The obvious one is food banks, but if you take food banks away, they do so many other things for communities. But can I just say though about volunteering, it is difficult to find volunteers, and it's true that we're not the only group of charitable group that's finding it hard to get volunteers, and volunteers are priceless. And Crystal and Olivia are fantastic examples, and that you need to thank volunteers. That sounds obvious, but sometimes volunteers go by as taken for granted. I hope you two are not taken for granted, but they can happen. And they do need to be thanked, and they do need some recognition, because everyone likes to be recognized for what you've done. But the other point, though, in our economic study that we were looking at, it's quite obvious probably to most people, if you have a volunteer anywhere, they're giving a service to someone else. So the person who's benefiting from that volunteer being there, that's great for them. But you can actually measure, and it is true that as a volunteer, one benefits, and there's an economic value you can put on that. So somebody who does volunteer, it improves their own well-being. They may be somebody who's lonely, or they may not have plenty of things to do. They may do, but it really does affect positively your life if you are a volunteer. And that's something I think needs drawing out as well, because it's not just what can we get the volunteers to do because we need something for them to do. It's how do the volunteers actually, it enriches their lives, and in turn that makes them happier, and it's help, you know, so that's it's a win-win thing. But I understand people don't have so much time. There are young people who can volunteer as well if one thinks in enterprising ways, and I realize if you're in a rural place, you know, it's harder, but you know, there are things like the Duke of Edinburgh scheme where one can create some really useful task and a skill that they can learn, and why not use it in a church? Because they have to do, you know, so many hours of community service, they have to learn a skill, all the various things, and there's lots of other ways like that. And you know, we everybody needs to help, because National Churches Trust can't do everything, but they're all good points. Sorry, I was hogged the limelight, Rosie.
Slightly difficult political question of you or Diana. You can decide which one to take it. We might have a change in government at some point. Do you have to change in any way your pitch to government for more money, depending on what particular government is in power? I mean, I'm just wondering. I mean, it's stereotyping awfully, but you know, are you likely to get more funding in inner cities? For inner city churches held by Labour, in a Labour government, and more for the rural, hassle-y churches if in the Tory shires? I mean, do you have to think about that sort of thing? Diana, I'm going to ask you.
Diana, you answering that one?
I'm not sure I'll answer it, but what I will say is that clearly, if you're asking anyone for money, whether that's a charity that's been set up with particular objectives, or a government that had stated priority policies, as an applicant, it makes sense to be able to help them to understand how what you're asking for aligns with their objectives.
Very political answer, very good.
Oh, well, can I add to
yes,
that?
you
I mean,
can.
yeah, I mean, I was going to say something similar to that, but we have the same with people. For example, in a simple case, if we're looking to persuade somebody to give us some money, whether that's a friend who wants to join or a big trust funder, you know, we can explain, if you've got a friend who really loves beautiful old bricks and mortar and absolutely content to realize that the bricks and mortar need fixing, then we might explain the cause in that way. Whilst if somebody's more keen on the social things that happen in a church, then we say, well, look, we can't do those unless you fix the roof. So it's the same ask, but you just frame it in a different way. And it's a bit like, Rosie, you're a journalist, really. I mean, you need to explain what you want to get across in a way that the journalist kind of needs, in a way. But it's the same ask, but just described in a different way, I guess.
John, you mentioned Amazon and Sainsbury's and Tesco's, and you know, you sort of said, I love that thing that, you know, in the old days it was the knights and the barons and the bishops who gave the money, and you said they're not going to give it us. But do we try? Should we try? Government's not got the money. Some of these enormous corporations have got the money. Should they be funding the churches?
That's a difficult question, because a business has a different set of ethoses. So, you know, I run a practice. My accountants and everybody tell me the business is there to make money to survive. It's not there to provide employment or to give money away. So that's a very difficult question to answer. In previous centuries, people gave money through a number of reasons. One, they were generous, but two, if you go far enough back, they were giving money to perhaps atone for what they'd done or to curry favour. Now, if suddenly looking after historic churches of all denominations was the most important thing to the voting population of this country, you can imagine everybody would be throwing vast amounts of money at them, because that's how you curry favour and how you build sort of a following or respect. So what we have to do is make the care of our historic churches of all denominations important, so people value it and organisations value it, and therefore they will help us. And some of these organisations do help. We have had money, small amounts of money out of, I think a couple of churches have had out of Waitrose, I think, locally for particular things, but relatively small sums of money, or help in kind. You know, if we're running an event, pizzas and food has turned up at no cost. So we do get some help, but not the same as perhaps the medieval lords.
You're nodding there, Emma. Have you got sort of individual little partnerships in Newport where you get sort of some in-kind sort of exchanges with businesses and maybe even philanthropists?
Yeah, we have got a few. You know, there are some very generous people around, and if there's a cause that they want to back and they're enthusiastic about, then you know we do get backers for that. We have, you know, worked with Morrison's and people like that. They may give us some food for a particular event or something like that. The entertainer I've found to be very generous in the past to give, you know, toys for different creches, or you know, for prizes for different events and things like that. So
rather than the building itself, perhaps. And that's part of what's so important about keeping so many of these churches open is the work they do. So here's a difficult one for you, John. What about really ugly church? And so, you know, we've celebrated beautiful buildings here. How do you make the case for the really ugly church to get the funding?
Well, I think that's a bit of an unfortunate phrase. I mean, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. I mean, my wife will tell you that. All buildings are valued by somebody, you know, and we work as a practice, we work with churches from the 1980s through to the 7th century. And if you go to a 1980s building, which quite frankly, the best thing you could probably do with it is demolish it because the roof leaks and it's not built very well, but the congregation still love them. And so that doesn't particularly worry me. I think what it is, it's getting across to the wider community the value of their church, regardless of whether or not it's a Grade 1, scheduled ancient monument, wonderful architectural edifice, or the simple brick box with plastic windows and a flat roof. You know, they all have a value. And every community, there's always somebody in every community that loves them.
I think there's also the thing about the current users of the buildings, the current generation, finding ways of telling their stories, perhaps in a visible way for the future generations. I mean, on one of those, I think it was on the Minster, there was this statue with a eroded face, and you think, who was that of? You know, who was that man, and what was his role in this place? And I just wonder whether we give enough thought to leaving behind those visible signs of the communities in the churches there. I don't know if anyone would like to respond to that. Claire, perhaps you would, or Emma.
Well, if I say that statue was false, actually, but we've got a church that's putting in a COVID memorial window at the moment, which is being made by the local community. There is some discussion at DAC level on the quality, perhaps, of the design, but that aside, it's a hugely important thing for that community to make this, and it'll go into the west window in that church. So we are adding, you know, items from our times.
Does anyone want to add to that? About how we make the buildings continue to tell the stories of the people in them. Right, well, I think that's we're just about out of time. I just want to tell you about the website link for National Churches Trust, which is www.nationalchurchestrust.org. Do contact the National Churches Trust at info@nationalchurchestrust.org. Just thank you all very much indeed for taking part in this rather heartwarming webinar. I look forward to finding out where the next tranche of funding is coming from, how it's going to be distributed, what the National Churches Trust will do with the money that it gets to give out. But for now, my thanks to you all, to Claire and Emma and Diana and John, and all of those from the 3 projects that we shared details of. I've really enjoyed being with you. I hope you've enjoyed it too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rosie, for hosting that for us. And thank you everyone for joining as well from us, everyone at the NCT. And look out for our National Church Awards, which are coming up. Look on our website. And if you have a church project that you would like possibly to win an award, do have a look, and there's lots of different categories, and the website is the best place to look, but email us if you want to find out more. And my thanks to everybody again.